At the opening of 18th century, Albany stood along Upper Hudson River as a compact Dutch-influenced settlement, its streets narrow, its buildings timbered, and its daily rhythms shaped by river traffic, seasonal trade, and local authority of provincial officials. Positioned between coastal New York and interior territories, Albany functioned as a critical geographic hinge, linking Atlantic markets with inland networks extending toward the Great Lakes, where indigenous nations maintained established routes long preceding European presence and control. This location ensured that Albany developed not as an isolated town, but as a negotiated space where Dutch descendants, English administrators, and native leaders engaged continuously in exchange, diplomacy, and guarded coexistence under shifting imperial expectations and local realities. By 1700, the English crown had consolidated control over New York, yet Albany retained distinct cultural continuities, including language patterns, property arrangements, and mercantile practices inherited from earlier Dutch governance and adapted gradually under British legal and administrative frameworks. For trading remained the economic foundation, structured through alliances with Haudenosaunee Confederacy communities, whose political autonomy shaped access to interior resources and required Albany merchants to maintain relationships grounded in reciprocity, negotiation, and mutual strategic interest. Beaver pelts and other furs moved through Albany warehouses toward export markets, while European goods flowed inland, creating a cycle that sustained livelihoods locally while binding the settlement to wider imperial economic systems centered on extraction and redistribution. Merchants accumulated influence not only through trade wealth but also through civic roles, occupying positions within municipal governance and informal networks that mediated disputes, regulated transactions, and reinforced stability within a community dependent on trust and continuity. Albany's population remained relatively small, yet socially layered, including free settlers, indentured laborers, enslaved Africans, and indigenous visitors, each contributing to a complex social fabric shaped by hierarchy, economic necessity, and evolving legal definitions of status. The presence of enslaved Africans expanded gradually, integrated into households and commercial enterprises, reflecting broader colonial patterns while embedding systems of unfreedom within Albany's local economy and social order during early 18th century development. Religious life centered on the Dutch Reformed Church, which continued to influence education, moral regulation, and communal identity, even as Anglican institutions gained official support under English rule, creating overlapping spheres of spiritual authority and cultural affiliation. Seasonal cycles governed activity, with winters slowing river navigation and trade, while spring and summer brought increased movement of goods and people, reinforcing Albany's dependence on environmental conditions that shaped both opportunity and vulnerability within regional commerce. Fortifications remained modest but symbolically important, representing both defense against potential conflict and assertion of British sovereignty in a frontier region where imperial boundaries remained fluid and subject to negotiation, contestation, and periodic military concern. Interactions with nearby indigenous nations required careful diplomacy, as Albany officials participated in councils and gift exchanges designed to maintain alliances, particularly with Haudenosaunee leaders whose influence extended across vast territories critical to imperial competition. These diplomatic relationships carried political consequences, positioning Albany as a site where colonial and indigenous interests intersected, often requiring compromise while simultaneously advancing British strategic objectives against rival French expansion in northern and western regions. Throughout early decades, Albany's governance balanced local autonomy with directives from New York City, where colonial authorities issued policies that did not always align with frontier conditions, requiring adaptation and sometimes quiet resistance by local officials and merchants. Economic reliance on fur trade created vulnerability to fluctuations in supply and demand, as overhunting, shifting alliances, and competition from French traders altered established patterns, forcing Albany merchants to adjust strategies and diversify commercial activities where possible. Gradually, agricultural production in surrounding areas increased, supplementing trade income and supporting population stability, though Albany itself remained primarily a commercial and administrative center rather than a large-scale farming community within the Hudson Valley region. Infrastructure developed slowly, with roads connecting Albany to other settlements improving over time, facilitating overland movement that complemented river transport and expanded the town's reach into broader colonial networks of exchange and communication. Education remained limited but present, often conducted through church-associated instruction, reinforcing religious and cultural norms while providing basic literacy necessary for participation in trade, governance, and record-keeping within the settlement's structured environment. Albany's built environment evolved incrementally, with stone replacing timber in some structures, reflecting both increased wealth and desire for permanence in a location once considered frontier but increasingly integrated into stable colonial administration. The town's role as intermediary between empire and interior would persist, embedding long-term structural importance that extended beyond immediate economic cycles, shaping Albany's identity as a durable node within networks of trade, diplomacy, and governance. By mid-century approaches, Albany remained defined by its position, its negotiated relationships, and its adaptive institutions, establishing patterns that would influence its trajectory through coming decades of imperial tension, transformation, and eventual revolutionary change.
By the 1730s, Albany's position within British North America had grown more defined as imperial rivalries intensified, and the town's role as a diplomatic and commercial frontier outpost gained increasing strategic importance within broader colonial planning. Trade patterns continued to evolve, with merchants expanding beyond furs into goods such as grain, timber, and imported textiles, reflecting gradual economic diversification that reduced exclusive dependence on beaver pelts while still maintaining long-standing indigenous trading relationships. This diversification did not eliminate uncertainty, as market fluctuations and changing alliances continued to affect profitability, requiring Albany traders to balance risk through varied investments and careful maintenance of regional and transatlantic commercial connections. Geographically, Albany's placement along the Hudson River remained central to its function, as the waterway provided the most efficient route between New York City and inland territories, reinforcing its status as a logistical gateway linking coastal administration with interior exchange networks. Control of this corridor carried military implications, as British authorities increasingly viewed Albany as a forward position in defending against French influence extending southward from Canada, particularly through contested regions surrounding Lake Champlain and the Mohawk Valley. Diplomatic councils held in Albany became more frequent during this period, involving representatives of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, British officials, and colonial intermediaries, each negotiating terms that balanced sovereignty, alliance obligations, and access to trade goods. These gatherings reinforced Albany's identity as a meeting ground where language, protocol, and cultural understanding played essential roles, requiring interpreters and experienced negotiators who could navigate complex expectations across differing political systems. Local governance structures adapted gradually, with municipal leaders managing both everyday civic concerns and broader diplomatic responsibilities, reflecting the town's dual role as a functioning community and an extension of imperial authority in a contested frontier environment. Population growth remained modest but steady, bringing increased diversity in occupation and background, including artisans, laborers, and traders who contributed to a more varied local economy, while reinforcing existing social hierarchies and systems of dependence. Enslaved labor persisted within households and businesses, forming an embedded component of Albany's economic and social framework, where individuals of African descent were denied autonomy, yet remained essential to the functioning of domestic and commercial operations. Religious institutions continued to influence daily life, with the Dutch Reformed Church maintaining prominence, while Anglican presence expanded, reflecting both continuity and gradual integration into British imperial culture without fully displacing earlier traditions. Education and literacy improved incrementally, supporting administrative efficiency and commercial record-keeping, as written contracts, correspondence, and ledgers became increasingly important in sustaining trust and accountability within expanding economic networks. Road systems improved further during this period, linking Albany more effectively to surrounding settlements and facilitating movement of goods beyond reliance on river transport alone, thereby strengthening regional integration and expanding commercial opportunities inland. Military preparations became more visible as tensions with France escalated, leading to reinforcement of local defenses and increased coordination with British forces, though Albany itself remained more a coordination center than a site of major direct conflict. The town's economy benefited from military demand, as provisioning troops and supplying expeditions created additional avenues for profit, linking Albany's merchants more directly to imperial military campaigns and logistical systems. These developments carried social consequences, as increased military presence and economic activity contributed to shifts in daily life, including greater demand for labor, heightened regulation, and closer oversight by colonial authorities concerned with security. At the same time, indigenous alliances remained essential, as British strategies depended on maintaining Haudenosaunee cooperation, requiring continued diplomacy that respected established relationships while advancing imperial interests in contested northern territories. Failures in diplomacy occasionally led to tensions, highlighting the limits of British influence and the independent agency of indigenous nations, whose decisions could significantly alter trade routes, security conditions, and regional balance of power. Albany's merchants and officials learned to operate within these constraints, developing practices that emphasized negotiation, adaptability, and long-term relationship building rather than reliance on unilateral control or rigid enforcement of authority. Architectural changes reflected growing stability, with more permanent structures appearing and urban layout becoming slightly more organized, indicating confidence in Albany's continued importance within colonial systems despite ongoing geopolitical uncertainty. Economic interdependence deepened, as Albany became increasingly tied to both New York City markets and interior suppliers, forming a network that distributed risk while reinforcing the town's role as an intermediary hub within regional commerce. By the early 1750s, Albany had solidified its position as a strategic, economic, and diplomatic center, its structures and relationships shaped by decades of adaptation, setting conditions that would soon be tested by the approaching conflicts of mid-century imperial war.